and I know these Frenchmen out and out. They so loathe a Jew that they never come nearer than a couple of yards of him, and begad, I fancy that I contrive to make myself look about as loathsome an object as it is possible to conceive." "Yes. And then?" she asked eagerly. "Zooks! Then I carried out my little plan. That is to say, at first I only determined to leave everything to chance, but when I heard Chauvelin giving his orders to the soldiers, I thought that fate and I were going to work together after all. I reckoned on the blind obedience of the soldiers. Chauvelin had ordered them on pain of death not to stir until the tall Englishman came. Degas had thrown me down in a heap quite close to the hut. The soldiers took no notice of the Jew who had driven Citoyen Chauvelin to this spot. I managed to free my hands from the ropes with which the brute had trussed me. I always carry pencil and paper with me wherever I go, and I hastily scrawled a few important instructions on a scrap of paper. Then I looked about me. I crawled up to the hut, under the very noses of the soldiers who lay under cover without stirring, just as Chauvelin had ordered them to do. Then I dropped my little note into the hut through a chink in the wall and waited. In this note I told the fugitives to walk noiselessly out of the hut, creep down the cliffs, keep to the left until they came to the first creek, to give a certain signal when the boat of the Daydream, which lay in wait not far out to sea, would pick them up. They obeyed implicitly, fortunately for them and for me. The soldiers who saw them were equally obedient to Chauvelin's orders. They did not stir. I waited for nearly half an hour. When I knew that the fugitives were safe, I gave the signal, which caused so much stir. And that was the whole story. It seemed so simple, and Marguerite could but marvel at the wonderful ingenuity, the boundless pluck and audacity which had evolved and helped to carry out this daring plan. "But those brutes struck you!" she gasped in horror, at the bare recollection of their fearful indignity. "Well, that could not be helped," he said gently. "Whilst my little wife's fate was so uncertain, I had to remain here by her side. Odds life," he added merrily, "never fear. Chauvelin would lose nothing by waiting, I warrant. Wait till I get him back to England. La, he shall pay for the thrashing he gave me with compound interest, I promise you." Marguerite laughed. It was so good to be beside him, to hear his cheery voice, to watch that good-humoured twinkle in his blue eyes as he stretched out his strung arms, in longing for that foe and anticipation of his well-deserved punishment. Suddenly, however, she started. The happy blush left her cheek, the light of joy died out of her eyes. She had heard a stealthy footfall overhead, and a stone had rolled down from the top of the cliffs right down to the beach below. "What's that?" she whispered in horror and alarm. "Oh, nothing, my dear," he muttered with a pleasant laugh. "Only a trifle you happen to have forgotten. My friend Ffoulkes." "Sir Andrew!" she gasped. Indeed, she had wholly forgotten the devoted friend and companion who had trusted and stood by her during all these hours of anxiety and suffering. She remembered him now, tardily and with a pang of remorse. "Aye, you had forgotten him, hadn't you, my dear?" said Sir Percy merrily. "Fortunately I met him, not far from the Chagris, before I had that interesting supper-party with my friend Chauvelin. Odds life, but I have a score to settle with that young reprobate. But in the meanwhile I told him of a very long, very circuitous road, which Chauvelin's men would never suspect, just about the time when we are ready for him. Eh, little woman?" "And he obeyed?" asked Marguerite in utter astonishment. "Without word or question. See, here he comes. He was not in the way when I did not want him, and now he arrives in the nick of time. Ah, he will make pretty little Suzanne a most admirable and methodical husband." In the meanwhile Sir Andrew Ffoulkes had cautiously worked his way down the cliffs. He stopped once or twice, pausing to listen for whispered words which would guide him to Blakeney's hiding-place. "Blakeney?" he ventured to say at last cautiously. "Blakeney, are you there?" The next moment he rounded the rock against which Sir Percy and Marguerite were leaning, and seeing the weird figure still clad in the Jew's long gabardine, he paused in sudden, complete bewilderment. But already Blakeney had struggled to his feet. "Here I am, friend," he said with his funny, inane laugh, "all alive, though I do look like a begad scarecrow in these demmed things." "Zooks!" ejaculated Sir Andrew in boundless astonishment as he recognized his leader. "Of all the—" The young man had seen Marguerite, and happily checked the forcible language that rose to his lips at the sight of the exquisite Sir Percy in this weird and dirty garb. "Yes," said Blakeney calmly, "of all the— My friend, I have not yet had time to ask you what you were doing in France when I ordered you to remain in London. Insubordination, what? Wait till my shoulders are less sore, and by gad see the punishment you'll get." "Odds fish, I'll bear it," said Sir Andrew with a merry laugh, "seeing that you are alive to give it. Would you have had me allow Lady Blakeney to do the journey alone? But in the name of heaven, man, where did you get these extraordinary clothes?" "Lud, they are a bit quaint, ain't they?" laughed Sir Percy jovially. "But odds fish," he added with sudden earnestness and authority, "now you are here, folks, we must lose no more time. That brute Chauvelin may send someone to look after us." Marguerite was so happy she could have stayed here forever, hearing his voice, asking 100 questions. But at mention of Chauvelin's name she started in quick alarm, afraid for the dear life she would have died to save. "But how can we get back?" she gasped. "The roads are full of soldiers between here and Calais, and—" "We are not going back to Calais, sweetheart," he said, "but just the other side of Grenay, not half a league from here. The boat of the Daydream will meet us there." "The boat of the Daydream?" "Yes," he said, with a merry laugh. "Another little trick of mine. I should have told you before that when I slipped that note into the hut I also added another for Armand, which I directed him to leave behind, which has sent Chauvelin and his men running full tilt back to the Chat Gris after me. But the first little note contained my real instructions, including those to old Briggs. He had my orders to go out further to sea, and then towards the west. When well out of sight of Calais, he will send the galley out to a little creek he and I know of, just beyond Grenay. The men will look out for me. We have a preconcerted signal, and we will all be safely aboard, whilst Chauvelin and his men solemnly sit and watch the creek which is just opposite the Chat Gris." "The other side of Grenay? But I cannot walk, Percy," she moaned helplessly as, trying to struggle to her tired feet, she found herself unable even to stand. "I will carry you, dear," he said simply. "The blind leading the lame, you know." Sir Andrew was ready, too, to help with the precious burden, but Sir Percy would not entrust his beloved to any arms but his own. "When you and she are both safely on board the Daydream," he said to his young comrade, "and I feel that Mademoiselle Suzanne's eyes will not greet me in England with reproachful looks, then it will be my turn to rest." And his arms, still vigorous in spite of fatigue and suffering, closed round Marguerite's poor weary body, and lifted her as gently as if she had been a feather. Then, as Sir Andrew discreetly kept out of earshot, there were many things said, or rather whispered, which even the autumn breeze did not catch, for it had gone to rest. All his fatigue was forgotten. His shoulders must have been very sore, for the soldiers had hit hard, but the man's muscles seemed made of steel, and his energy was almost supernatural. It was a weary tramp, half a league along the stony side of the cliffs, but never for a moment did his courage give way or his muscles yield to fatigue. On he tramped, with firm footstep, his vigorous arms encircling the precious burden, and, with no doubt, as she lay quiet and happy, at times lulled to momentary drowsiness, at others watching, through the slowly gathering morning light, the pleasant face with the lazy, drooping blue eyes, ever cheerful, ever illumined with a good-humoured smile, she whispered many things, which helped shorten the weary road, and acted as a soothing balsam to his aching sinews. The many-hued light of dawn was breaking in the east, when at last they reached the creek beyond Grenay. The galley lay in wait. In answer to a signal from Sir Percy, she drew near, and 2 sturdy British sailors had the honour of carrying my lady into the boat. Half an hour later they were on board the Daydream. The crew, who of necessity were in their master's secrets, and who were devoted to him heart and soul, were not surprised to see him arriving in so extraordinary a disguise. Armand St. Just and the other fugitives were eagerly awaiting the advent of their brave rescuer. He would not stay to hear the expressions of their gratitude, but found the way to his private cabin as quickly as he could, leaving Marguerite quite happy in the arms of her brother. Everything on board the Daydream was fitted with that exquisite luxury so dear to Sir Percy Blakeney's heart, and by the time they all landed at Dover he had found time to get into some of the sumptuous clothes which he loved, and of which he always kept a supply on board his yacht. The difficulty was to provide Marguerite with a pair of shoes, and great was the little middy's joy when my lady found that she could put foot on English shore in his best pair. The rest is silence. Silence and joy for those who endured so much suffering, yet found at last a great and lasting happiness. But it is on record that at the brilliant wedding of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, Baronet, with Mademoiselle Suzanne de Tournay de Basserive, a function at which His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and all the elite of fashionable society were present, the most beautiful woman there was unquestionably Lady Blakeney, whilst the clothes Sir Percy Blakeney wore were the talk of the jeunesse dorée of London for many days. It is also a fact that Monsieur Chauvelin, the accredited agent of the French Republican government, was not present at that or any other social function in London after that memorable evening at Lord Grenville's ball. End of chapter 31. End of The Scarlet Pimpernel.